Welcome, everyone. Today, we're going deep, really deep, into the JFK assassination.
Oh,
We've
yeah.
got a whole bunch of the third decade articles, and you guys sent us some really interesting ones.
Spanning decades, right?
Yeah, decades. It's
Yeah.
going to be fun to kind of see how these theories evolved.
Yeah. And the third decade, they're known for, well, exploring these alternative theories. And everyone's got their own idea about what happened to JFK.
It really does capture, I think, the public imagination, even all these years later, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why are we still so obsessed with this event?
Well, the third decade, they're not shying away from any of the big ones. We've got the, magic bullet theory,
Right.
CIA, FBI, even the mafia gets thrown in there.
Yeah. And I think what's so fascinating about this is that, these theories, they kind of act like a mirror, reflecting back, the anxieties and the cultural climate of the time when they emerged.
That's true.
So, diving into the third decade, we're not just looking at theories about who killed Kennedy.
We're also, looking at America itself.
In the third decade, they focus a lot on, obviously, Lee Harvey Oswald, who's, the alleged assassin.
Yeah.
Jack Ruby, who, killed Oswald before there could even be a trial.
Oh, man. That's a whole other rabbit hole.
Well, we'll get there. We'll definitely get there. And then there's Jim Garrison,
Oh, yeah, Jim Garrison.
former district attorney from New Orleans.
Right.
He really goes all in, especially in these articles. I mean, he did his own investigation.
Full-blown investigation.
Yeah, and he's convinced
Convinced.
that anti-Castro Cubans, maybe even some folks within the U.S. government, were the ones pulling the strings.
A lot of people thought he was on the right track.
Oh, yeah.
He really zeroed in on Clay Shaw, remember him?
Yeah, Clay Shaw, a businessman from New Orleans. Garrison was certain he was part of this big conspiracy. And you know what? He put him on trial.
He did. Didn't get a conviction, though, did he?
No, he didn't. But yeah, the whole thing really got people talking.
Definitely did. It stirred the pot.
And the third decade, they don't stop there. They bring up this group, the American Security Council, the ASC, a pretty hardcore conservative group.
Right, right.
And some folks think they were involved somehow.
That's a really interesting angle.
Yeah.
Because you have to remember the context. This is the Cold War.
Oh, yeah.
Tensions are sky high. Everyone's suspicious of everyone else.
Right.
So the ASC, with their strong anti-communist stance and all these connections to people like David Ferry, the pilot,
Right.
Guy Bannister, ex-FBI, kind of a shadowy figure.
Very shadowy.
It's not hard to see why they'd attract attention.
No, it's not. And the third decade digs deep into the ASC, like who's funding them? What's
Yeah.
their history? Are they tied to any intelligence agencies?
You're not afraid to ask the tough questions.
Oh, no. It's like they're trying to uncover this, web of Cold War intrigue.
Exactly. And you know what's interesting is they take the Warren Commission report, which is the official report on the assassination,
Yeah.
and they basically rip it apart.
Yeah, they go after it. They're like, wait a minute, this doesn't add up.
Totally. They point out all these flaws they see, like the single bullet theory. That one bullet went through Kennedy and then hit Governor Connolly. They're like, no way.
And Oswald's motives, too. They question those as well.
Right. Because if Oswald didn't act alone, then who was he working with?
Exactly. And then, oh boy, this is where it gets really interesting.
Lay it on me.
They dive into the third man on the grassy knoll theory.
Oh, yeah, the grassy knoll.
Yeah, that's a classic.
Classic.
In the third decade, they highlight all these eyewitness accounts from people who say they saw somebody else shooting besides Oswald.
It's hard to dismiss all those eyewitnesses. I mean, they were there.
That's what they're saying. They're like, these people saw something.
Right.
And then there's this guy, Richard Case Nagel.
Nagel. Okay.
Yeah, shrouded in mystery. The third decade claims this was an alias used by one of the assassins.
Wow. So they're saying there was another shooter, and they even have a name.
Well, a possible name. It's all very hush-hush.
Of course, it's the JFK assassination. Nothing straightforward.
Nope. And his ties to, intelligence agencies and the fact that he just vanished after the assassination.
Disappeared. Poof.
Yeah.
Just like that.
Like a ghost. The third decade tries to piece together his background, and it's wild.
I bet. Give me the highlights.
So they're saying he was deep into espionage, covert ops, the whole 9 yards.
Sounds like something out of a spy novel.
Oh, it totally does. And this is where it gets even crazier. They suggest that Nagel was actually training anti-Castro Cuban exiles.
Whoa, hold on. Cuban exiles.
Yeah, and that he may have even been involved in plots to kill Fidel Castro himself.
So they're saying the Kennedy assassination could be linked to attempts on Castro's life.
That's what they're hinting at.
Yeah.
And the theory goes that some people in the U.S. government, maybe intelligence, felt like Kennedy had betrayed them during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Right, right.
Like he didn't go far enough.
They saw him as weak on communism.
Exactly. And maybe even a threat to their goals.
So Kennedy becomes a liability.
Right. And Nagel, with his connections to these groups,
He becomes a key player.
yeah, the central figure in this whole shadowy narrative. And the third decade, they even claim they have evidence that Nagel was in Dallas around the time of the assassination.
They're really building a case here.
Oh yeah, they even place him in Dealey Plaza right before the shooting.
That's pretty damning if they can prove it.
Well, that's the thing. A lot of this stuff about Nagel, it comes from, let's say, less than reliable sources.
Okay, so we have to take it with a grain of salt.
Definitely. But even so, the third decade raises some huge questions.
Like what?
Like, why did Nagel disappear? Why is it so hard to verify his identity, his background? It's like every time someone tries to learn more about this guy, they hit a brick wall.
It's almost like he never existed.
Right. And those unanswered questions, those are the things that keep the speculation going.
Absolutely. The mystery fuels the theories.
And the third decade, they're not holding back. They explore all these connections, all these possible motives.
It's a lot to unpack. Where do we even begin to untangle all of this?
Well, that's what we're here to do.
Let's dive in. It's a lot, right? But the third decade, they're not just throwing out a bunch of random ideas. They have a point to make. They really focus on the American Security Council, like we were talking about, and they don't pull any punches.
Oh yeah, they go hard. After the ASC, it's like they're peeling back all these layers of Cold War intrigue.
It's wild, isn't it?
Showing us all these hidden agendas and secret alliances. You'd never believe it.
Right. They paint this picture of the ASC as being obsessed with anti-communism.
Yeah, and they're suggesting that maybe, just maybe, they were connected to some of the people who might have been involved in the assassination plot.
Their argument is that the ASC had this network, right? Powerful people, connections to intelligence agencies.
Yeah, it's scary to think about.
And they might have actually helped those who wanted Kennedy out of the picture.
And the third decade brings up some pretty damning stuff. Like their connections to David Ferry, the pilot, who we talked about earlier, linked to all these anti-Castro groups.
And Guy Bannister, too.
Oh, yeah, the ex-FBI guy with a shady past.
Shady's an understatement.
It's like something out of a movie.
And then there's the whole thing with them training Cuban exiles.
Right. The Cuban exiles who might have been angry with Kennedy for what happened at the Bay of Pigs.
They felt betrayed by him.
Exactly. So are we talking about a grand conspiracy here? Powerful figures in the ASC, angry Cuban exiles, maybe even parts of the U.S. government, all working together to get rid of a president they saw as weak or even dangerous.
That's the theory the third decade is putting forward. And they try to back it up with evidence. Financial records, memos, eyewitness accounts. They paint a picture of a very carefully planned operation.
It's chilling, to be honest. It really gives you a glimpse into the paranoia of the Cold War.
How far people were willing to go to protect their ideals.
Yep, and the lengths they would go to shape the world.
Whether you buy into the third decade's theories or not, you have to admit they make you think. They force you to confront some uncomfortable truths about power, about the dark side of American history.
That's for sure. The third decade also spends a lot of time talking about David Ferry's death. Remember, he was a key figure in Jim Garrison's investigation.
Oh, right, right.
And they're basically saying he might have been murdered to keep him quiet.
Oh, wow.
It's definitely suspicious.
It is.
He died just a few days after his name was linked to the assassination.
Yeah, I remember reading that.
And the third decade, they challenged the official ruling of suicide.
Which was?
Suicide.
Oh, right, right.
But they point out all these inconsistencies in the evidence, and they think Ferry was eliminated to protect the conspirators.
To keep him from talking.
Exactly. And the fact that his apartment was completely ransacked.
Like someone was looking for something specific.
Yeah, maybe documents, evidence that could incriminate them.
And his connections to Oswald and the others make it even more suspicious.
Right. It's like, why was he killed if he wasn't a threat to someone?
Okay, so we've got David Ferry. Now, what about Jack Ruby, the guy who shot Oswald on live TV? I mean, that image is seared into everyone's memory.
It's such a crazy moment in history. Like the whole world stopped spinning for a second. It felt like the end of something.
It was just so shocking, and it felt like any hope of finding out the truth just vanished right then and there. Poof, gone.
And the third decade makes a pretty convincing case that Ruby might have been working for someone. silencing Oswald to stop him from revealing who was really behind it all.
Oh, wow. So they think Ruby was a hitman.
That's what they're suggesting. They delve into his ties to organized crime, and they're implying that maybe he was hired by the mob to take out Oswald, or at least to protect whoever had hired Oswald in the first place.
And what about Ruby himself? What was his motive?
Well, he claimed he acted impulsively, out of grief, that he wanted to spare Jackie Kennedy the pain of a trial.
But the third decade doesn't buy it.
No, they don't. They point out his close relationships with people who would have definitely benefited from Oswald's silence.
So they think it was premeditated, a calculated move to get rid of a loose end.
Exactly. They even suggest that he might have been in contact with these people before the shooting.
Wow, that's huge.
Right. It takes it from being this random act of violence to a carefully planned execution to protect a much bigger conspiracy.
It's chilling.
And speaking of conspiracies, we have to talk about the Warren Commission report.
Yeah.
The third decade really goes after it.
Oh, yeah. They don't hold back. What's their main beef with it?
They point out what they see as blatant omissions, inconsistencies, and a lack of thoroughness in the investigation.
Basically, they're saying the commission didn't do their job properly.
Right, and they think this casts serious doubt on their conclusion.
Which were?
That Oswald acted alone.
Right, right.
One of the things they really go after is the single bullet theory.
Ah, yes. The magic bullet.
Exactly. Just to remind everyone, that theory claims that one bullet went through Kennedy and then hit Governor Connolly, who was sitting in front of him in the car.
And third decade doesn't buy it.
No, they don't. They present all this ballistic evidence, expert testimony that contradicts that theory. They say the bullet's trajectory, the damage it caused, it just doesn't add up.
So they're saying it's physically impossible for that to have happened?
Basically, yeah. They also criticize the commission for relying on questionable eyewitness accounts and for not properly investigating Oswald's background.
They think the commission had an agenda.
Yeah, they think they were more interested in protecting powerful people and maintaining order than finding the truth. And they don't mince words.
What do they say?
They accuse the Warren Commission of a cover-up. Straight up.
Whoa.
They say they were protecting powerful interests and hiding truths that could have destabilized the nation. And this whole idea that the assassination wasn't just a lone gunman, that it was a complex conspiracy with multiple players and motives, that's central to the third decade's argument.
They believe the Warren Commission failed us, that they left us with more questions than answers.
Exactly. And one of the biggest questions, of course, is the whole third man on the grassy knoll mystery. We touched on it earlier, but the third decade really dives deep into it. They bring up all these eyewitness accounts, photos, even audio recordings that suggest there was someone else shooting at Kennedy besides Oswald.
It's hard to ignore all that, even if some of the evidence is disputed.
Exactly. And the third decade acknowledges that. They know some of the evidence is open to interpretation, that eyewitness accounts aren't always reliable.
But they also make a pretty strong case that there are just too many inconsistencies in the official narrative to ignore the possibility of a second gunman. They can't all be wrong, can they?
That's their argument. They say, look, there were multiple witnesses who heard shots coming from the grassy knoll.
Which goes against the Warren Commission's findings.
Exactly. And they even highlight photos that seem to show a puff of smoke coming from the grassy knoll right when the shots were fired, like a gun being fired.
And then there are the audio recordings?
Oh, yeah, they analyze those too. And some experts believe those recordings show a fourth shot, which would support the theory of another gunman.
That's pretty compelling.
Right. Now, the third decade doesn't claim to have solved the mystery.
No, of course not.
But they do raise some important questions. They challenge the official narrative and make us think about the possibility that the assassination might have been more coordinated, more complex than we've been led to believe.
And that's what makes this whole thing so fascinating. There are still so many unanswered questions, so many possibilities. You know, one thing that really struck me about the third decade is that they don't just get lost in the weeds of the assassination itself.
Right.
They actually take a step back and try to understand the bigger picture.
Like the why.
Yeah, exactly. Like, why did these theories take hold? What was it about the cultural and political climate that allowed them to flourish? It's not just about who pulled the trigger. It's about what made people believe these alternative narratives.
That's a really good point. It's easy to get caught up in the details, the forensic evidence, the eyewitness accounts, all that. But we have to remember that this happened during the Cold War, a time of incredible anxiety and distrust.
Right. The world felt like it was on the brink of nuclear war. People were afraid. They were looking for someone to blame, someone to make sense of the chaos.
And then you have the assassination of a young, charismatic president like Kennedy. It was traumatic for the whole nation. It shattered this sense of security, this idea that America was invincible.
Exactly. And when people are scared, when they're grieving, they're more likely to believe in conspiracies. They offer a sense of order, a sense of control in a world that suddenly feels very out of control.
So instead of accepting this random act of violence, this idea that one lone gunman could change the course of history, people started looking for a deeper meaning, a hidden hand controlling everything.
And the third decade does a great job of exploring that. They look at how the media, the way the assassination and its aftermath were covered, played a role in shaping public opinion, and how that, in turn, fueled all these different theories.
It makes you realize that history isn't just about facts. It's about how those facts are interpreted, how they're presented, and how that shapes our understanding of the world.
Exactly. The JFK assassination, it's not just a historical event. It's become a cultural phenomenon, a myth, a story that we keep telling ourselves over and over again, each time adding our own interpretation, our own anxieties, our own hopes and fears.
It's like a mirror reflecting back at us, showing us who we are as a society. Wow, what a deep dive. I feel like I've gone through a time warp, back to the 60s, back to this era of Cold War paranoia and political intrigue.
Me too. And the third decade, those articles really capture the essence of that time. The fear, the uncertainty, the desperate search for answers.
Whether you believe in a grand conspiracy or stick with the official story, I think we can all agree that the JFK assassination is an event that continues to fascinate and challenge us. It forces us to think critically, to question everything, and to never take anything at face value. And that's what makes these alternative theories so compelling. They remind us that history is never truly settled. There are always more questions to ask, more layers to uncover. So if you're intrigued by what we've explored today, I encourage you to dive deeper. Read the third decade articles, check out other sources, do your own research. The truth, whatever it may be, is out there waiting to be discovered.